Hey, I'm Greg Moran. Welcome to Founders Journey Insights. Just as a reminder, this is produced for our newsletter subscribers to go along with the Founders Journey newsletter every Friday. So appreciate you joining us again. We are talking about part 3 of the deep startup strategic planning process, and we've been talking about it over the past couple of weeks because when you look at traditional strategic planning processes, they're really built for large companies, right? So they're really strategic and startups need really tactical. It's really about narrowing down to what we can go accomplish. So over the past couple of weeks, we've talked about the first 2 steps, which were defining the problem space that we're solving with our product. And then the second step was really about narrowing down to a target that we can go own. When it's talked about narrowing down to a target, we're talking really tight target here of maybe 250 to 500 prospects within a target market. So really getting tight there within that problem space. So today we're actually talking about expanding, right? So we've gone out, we've done the first 2 steps, we identified the problem, we narrowed down to this really tight niche, and we've gone out, we've gotten 10 or 20 companies in the same target, right, within that same target, and really something magical starts to happen at that point, right? Because we have 10 or 20 companies that are all very similar to each other and we're deploying the same way, our product roadmap becomes far more aligned. We're not dealing with all kind of the random customer requests that are coming up with everybody asking us to build some new functionality because their market is a little bit different, right? And this happens in every startup. You show me one and it's there's no question it happens when you have a wide variety of customers. The other thing that happens is inbound referrals start to increase. These companies talk to each other because they're in the same market. And that's where the inbound referral machine starts to generate. Deployments and implementations become a lot easier because we're doing the same thing over and over. We don't have to figure out the customer every time. We know the customer's problem. We're deploying to that problem. And we start to build data. And case studies and ROI start to come out of this. So when we get this 10 or 20 companies, we're really starting to own that little bit of a critical mass, right? We're really starting to own that target market. Even with 10 or 20 companies, that's really all it takes. And now it's really time to expand, right? So now we've done that. And if you're having trouble getting to that first 10 or 20, what that may tell you is that you may not have targeted narrow enough, right? So if you're having trouble getting those first 10 or 20, you may want to then step back and say, okay, what is there a subset that we're seeing? And you may want to try to turn the crank one more time on that narrow market. But if that is not the case, then it's time to go get another 10 or 20 customers. But what we're going to do is do that in an adjacent market, right? So what that means is we're going to focus on exactly the same problem space. And we're going to find those adjacent markets that share those same problems. So I'll give you an example of my last company. When we first started, we were selling to fast food, quick service restaurants, which is basically the fancy name for fast food restaurants. And we had gone out, we had gotten a number of different brands and some really great brands within the fast food market. And this magic was starting to happen. We were starting to get referrals. We were starting to get, our product roadmap was narrowing. Our case studies were starting to build. So we said, okay, can we expand this just a little bit? And when we started to expand, we said, well, what is the fundamental problem that we're really trying to solve? And the fundamental problem, again, within fast food, one of the biggest problems that they have is turnover in what's called front of the house. Those are people you're interacting with, the servers, the counter staff, things like that. And it's first 30-day turnover. So when turnover happens in a fast food restaurant, it typically happens in the first even 2 weeks, but certainly 30 days. And this is really costly turnover. And that's really the problem that we were trying to help them solve. We're a recruiting application. So we went out and said, okay, who else shares this problem? Well, within this tight market, there's the same problem exists in other types of restaurants. We were focused on fast food. So we said, okay, what is the adjacent market that we can go to expand to that has this 250 to 500 target prospects? Remember, this is something when we talked last week about narrowing the target, we said, really want to get down to like 250 to 500 companies within that narrow target. And we said, okay, fast casual is the way to do that. Now, fast casual, think about Chili's or Applebee's, right? As examples. And they're both clients of ours. And same exact issue. Turnover really high in the first 30 days. How do you start to expand out to that? Well, we had built enough of a following within fast food, within quick service, to be able to say, here are the case studies. Here's how we're reducing first 30-day turnover in these fast food restaurants. Let's see how this applies to quick service or to fast casual, I'm sorry. And that is exactly the way that it works. So we were able to go in, use the data from the adjacent market, sell into the fast casual market, to the Chili's and Applebee's and things like that. And sure enough, the product worked. It reduced turnover, first 30-day turnover, the same problem space, right? By similar amounts, it was working again, right? And we were then able to go sell to those 250 to 500 targets and pick up another 10 or 20 of those, right? And start to get the data, start to have that magic happen again, right? Get the inbound referrals, get the data, build the case studies, do all those things. And then you can just start repeating that process, right? Broad markets can be really dangerous for a startup. They absorb huge amounts of bandwidth. Nothing becomes repeatable. It's hard to get them scalable, where narrow markets really allow us to target our messaging, to target our positioning on a really narrow targeted buyer, and that messaging and positioning really resonates. We're able to close faster and sometimes even at higher prices because it's so targeted. Implementation becomes easier, delivery becomes easier. We're getting higher gross and net margins or net retention because companies are staying longer and they're expanding because, again, it's so highly targeted. And it's an overall more efficient delivery and service and support model. So we're getting higher gross margins as well. So a lot of good things come out of this. Really encourage you to keep narrowing down. And then once you get that little critical mass forming within that really narrow market, then you start expanding out to that same problem space if they share the same problem, right? Just a little bit more sound way to expand than taking it from a top-down approach and saying, hey, we've got this giant TAM, total addressable market, that we're going to go after, right? Which is the fundamental problem that most startups make when they creating a go-to-market process. So hope this helps. Hope you have a great week. If you are not subscribed to the Founders Journey podcast, I hope you'll do that. You can do it right on the same channel here. And where every week we interview founders telling their own stories about their own founder's journey. So really hope you'll take a minute and subscribe to that. Have a wonderful week. See you next week.